Alright, so there's no good videos on YouTube showing you the insides or how to assemble a 600RR. This one is off an 05. 03 to 06 is the same motor. Few things to note whenever you take it apart. This transmission assembly will lift straight out of here. It's not a big deal, but there's a divot in the back side of this bearing that's got to line up, and this tiny little stud right here. That lays down inside the lower casing right here. If that's sticking up here and this is not seated, the lower casing will not seat in the dowel pins. All you got to do, push it down into its divot. It sits nice and flush and doesn't stick up. Something else to note is your oil restrictors here. There's another one here that stays with the lower casing. If they're not in it, you're not going to have oil. This is as far as I needed to go with it. As far as the teardown, if you have a bad rod bearing, there's all your caps. Pull it off, change the bearings, torque them back. Everything here that has to do with the camshaft gets torqued to a certain number and then degreed to another number. If you don't have hundreds of dollars to spend on a degree wrench, you can pick one of these up on Amazon. Cheap enough, gets the job done. Show you the other restrictor right here. If this is not in there, it's not going to work. Make sure those are in. These cases do not have a gasket that goes between them. It gets silicone, but you have to watch where you put your silicone. If you go inside of here where you don't need to be and you plug this track up, now you're not getting any more oil. Same thing on this side. Be very sparing with your silicone. The only places you need it are where the case comes outside. You don't need it on all these internal surfaces. Oil can leak itself inside the motor. It doesn't matter. If you don't know, this is your oil pump. Has a gear over here with a little tiny chain. Outside, stick in, is your water pump. Bolts on from outside. Just a rubber O-ring that holds it. These are galley plugs. If you take this out, make sure it goes back. Otherwise, all your oil is going to come out of the pump, through the oil passage, and dump straight out of the end. It'll never build pressure. It'll never work. You'll kill it within a minute. If you don't know, these are your crank bearings. All 5 of them. This is a used motor. It had supposedly 13,000 miles on it. They've had a tiny bit of contact, but nothing we can't reuse. Oil cooler, if you don't know what it is, this outside edge all along the front needs a thin bead of silicone. Same thing across the back, thin bead. You do not want to put a 1/4 inch bead all the way around it on every flat surface, because then you're just killing yourself. You're gonna have silicone in places you don't need it. I'll go through later and we'll show you all your different timing marks, how to set it up once you put the head back on. This one I thought had a bearing go out, but turns out it ate a camshaft alive. I'll show you once again, once I get the silicone on it, where you need it and where you don't. Alright, we got our silicone on. Everywhere that leads to outside the motor. Internal passages into the covers, do not do. Very thin, very small lines. It looks bigger in the video than they really are. But it's actually maybe an 1/8 inch bead all around what leads outside. Internal passages are untouched. Don't need it there. Now with that done, we're ready to set the upper casing on. Lower casing onto the upper. There's no bolts in it yet. Literally just set it down on top of it. If you have to force this case or think that you need a hammer, something is not right. It will sit straight down on top of the dowel pins. And you've got a nice little bead coming out around the inside between the cases. If you think you need a hammer to seat it, something is off. Do not try and seat it with force. Everything lines up nice and pretty, sitting down flush. We're ready to put some bolts in it. These are your bolts. These two gold ones, you can see the color. They're gold and they're a bit longer than a regular crank bolt. In comparison, take the gold ones, they go outside by the flywheel. As such, all your small silver bolts go inside on the crankshaft. Depending on what scale you're using, these get torqued and then they go 120 degrees, which comes out to 15 Newton meters, 10 foot-pounds. I don't know inch-pounds right off. You have these bolts left. You have one great big 14 here. It goes right here at the transmission. The rest of these go in the back of the case. There's two that are longer than the other two. The longer ones go up in the top step. See, they're higher. If you put them in the lower, you're gonna have way too much bolt left over. Go in the top. Two shorter ones go in the bottom. After that, you have an array of smaller bolts that go in the casings. The one long 10 millimeter right there by the swing arm mount. Your shorties just go, whoops, wrong one, medium size, only one of the group. Rest of your shorties go in the front side of the case. Try not to drop them like I just did, because then they get covered in sand and jet. It is easier to get those two, this little guy here and this guy here, if you take these off. I just didn't feel like it. That said, in the lower casing, there are 3 bolts that come through the upper into the lower, so from the other side. But do not take the lower casing off with the motor right side up, head side up. You want it upside down. Otherwise, the transmission comes out with the case, and the only thing left holding the crank inside the motor is the piston rings. It's a lot easier to just do it upside down. Your life will be better. With that said, got most all of our bolts sitting in here. Silvers on the outside, on your left hand side, gold's over here at the flywheel. Everything inside is the big silvers. There are 2 small 10 millimeters that go over here by the oil pump. Other than that, that's all your casing bolts. So we'll get these torqued down and move forward. A couple other things that'll be beneficial if you're reassembling this. The 2 bolts I mentioned in here, you can see the height difference, focus phone, between the 2. This is the drive side of the oil pump. There's your little bitty chain hanging at the top of the clutch. We ain't worried about that right now. These are the 2 bolts. There are 2 different lengths for 2 different heights. Tall one goes in the tall slot, short one, short slot. Not everybody knows. Other than that, when you go to tighten all this down, do not just tighten a line and a line. Start in the center and work your way out in a circle. Don't just start cramming down on these and jumping all over the place. There is an actual spec for it and an order that they need to be tightened in, so that way the case sits down flat and even. Remember, all your crank bearings are inside of here. They need to be even and flush. If not, it's going to eat itself alive. Alright, at this point, everything is torqued down. Put a little dot with a paint marker on top of each bolt to know that I got it. Everything here is nice and tight, and I lied to you guys, there's one more right over here that I didn't point out in the original. It's next to the 14 by your front sprocket, under the water pump or above, depending on which way you want to look at it. At this point, everything here is together. We can go ahead and get the bottom end put back in. Oil restrictor or relief valve pops right in that hole with an O-ring. Simple as that. Pickup tube sits right in the bottom of the pump. I don't have mine cleaned out yet, and I'm not going to go ahead and put the oil pan on. Do not forget your drive chain. At this point, a grabber and a magnet are your best friend, because the chain will be wadded up on the bottom down there, and you have to get it back on the sprocket. Simple way to do it. Take your bolt out. Try and sit you down. Sprocket falls right off the end, and it's keyed. Doesn't have an actual key. It's designed to go on in the exact right slot so it doesn't free spin. It says out straight on it. Doesn't matter if you put it this way or this way, but that faces out. Doesn't say anything on the back. It's out towards your clutch cover. Take your chain here, pick it up. Got it with my fingers here. Slide your sprocket in. Alright, y'all gotta go back down. Slide it on the chain, pull it up. You can turn the oil pump to where that rectangle fits together. Damn, that was fuzzy. And slides right on. Says out, it's in there. That's all there is to it. Put your bolt back in it, and you're good to go on your oil pump drive. At this point, you can go ahead and put your pickup tube on. You can put your oil pan on. Put the water pump in. I'm going to take it as far as I can because I'm waiting on the head gasket. Make sure when you're doing your little bolts here, you don't go too strong with them. They're going into an aluminum case and they're a tiny bolt. All this stuff is super lightweight compared to a V8 4-cylinder, a normal size 4-cylinder. This Japanese stuff, very, very lightweight. Don't worry about being off a degree or two on your 120 extra turn, because God knows Japanese are off a degree or two. Once again, stupid simple little tool. Let's see. Show you. $12mm right on the back side of it. Set it on your bolt. Then you can turn everything here to get that arm right up against the block. Hold it stout. Now you see we're still at 120 here, but this window will turn if you're off, just in case you don't know how to use it. You can go from 0 to 120, then you can go to 240, whatever you want to do on the next bolt. This arm will adjust. All it has to do is catch something inside the motor to hold that still. Then as you turn, only that little dial turns and you run it over to 120. If you can do it in one smooth stroke, that's best, instead of stopping, letting pressure off the bolt, and then going at it again. We'll keep going here. Don't forget to put your oil window back on. It has to come off to get that bolt out. At this point, we'll just keep moving on. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it. So we're gonna finish this off with the bottom end. Got a restrictor here dropped in. Simply has an O-ring on it. Slides right in the hole. Just like that. Oil pickup, same thing. It's got an arm on it. got a slot. Just like that. Nice O-ring seals, good to go. Be careful what gets into this motor, because it'll find its way into a bearing and then we're starting over. Those two in, we're ready to put the pan on. Just cleaned it out, nice and clean, ready to roll. But before that, we need a thin layer of silicone. Again, a thin layer. This one is not critical like it was on the crank or the lower case, for the simple fact there's no oil passages to block. So we're going to get our handy dandy silicone, run a bead around it. Just like that, we have silicone. It's a little bigger of a bead than I used on the casings, just because it was easier. I do just use regular Permatex Ultra Black. I know there's specialty Honda stuff that they recommend, but Honda recommends a lot of stuff that us real mechanics don't need. So with that said, everything's on there, ready for the pan. This does not have a dowel or any alignments. Just loosely set it on top of your silicone to where you can see through. You can't see in the video. I like to start a bolt in each corner. 1, 2, 3, and 4. At this point, all you gotta do, put in the rest of them, run around, tighten them up, and that's the bottom end of your motor assembly. I'll probably do a separate video for putting on the head gasket, the head, timing, all that fun stuff. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed. I searched YouTube whenever I was originally building a motor, trying to find some help, some pointers, somebody who's done it and videoed it to where I could see what I was getting into, and there just isn't anything. So I hope this helps you guys, and now you've seen what's inside of there. It's not intimidating. If you're mechanically inclined, you can do it. But hope this helps. See you in the next one.